There probably is no more classic a freight locomotive than the Stanier 8F. This one actually has a bit of an interesting history. It's numbered under BR as 48045. She was built in 1936 and started work with the LMS as 8045. But she was one of 51 locomotives sent over to the Middle East with the War Department, and she served out there with the British Army until 1948 when she came back and entered service with British Railways as number 48045 as we see her in 1949. A bit of a difference this time, she is actually paired with a Fowler tender instead of the more usual BR1B I think it is tender, which we'll see later. This did happen and it looks rather good, doesn't it? We'll ask the driver to slowly pull the train forward and then we'll consider a question. So as she creeps forward there, which was one of the reasons the Stanier 8F was so successful, they could move forward very slowly and smoothly without snatching. You'll notice that all the lead vehicles are in the BR bauxite colour. This meant that they had a brake cylinder on each of the vehicles, which could be operated by the driver in his cab. Towards the rear we have some grey wagons. These were not fitted with a brake cylinder. So no matter what the driver did with his brake valve in the cab, no brakes would apply on these wagons. However, because of the fitted wagons, i.e. vacuum cylinders fitted, when the driver applied his brakes, all the fitted wagons would also brake with the train. This was known as a fitted head. The wagons at the rear without brakes would push into the other ones. A skilled driver would have his fireman screw the handbrake down on the tender of the loco slightly, just to make sure that all the buffers closed up. This was called buffing up, and this would make sure that no couplings could be snapped, something that could happen due to the pressures involved. At the rear of the train, of course, was the brake van, and the guard's job was also to keep the train moving smoothly and to ensure that he kept the couplings tight. With 8 coupled driving wheels, the 8F was known to have fantastic brakes out of all the freight locomotive types. It was obviously steam operated. We just move it forward a little bit and get a pointer. You can see under the cab here part of the levering system that would go along, and there's a cylinder directly under the cab which was operated by the driver's brake valve, and that would apply the brakes using rodding on all 8 driving wheels. You can see this sanding gear modelled on this Hornby model. It's actually a second-hand model that I've got recently, dating from I think 2004. The brakes would also apply automatically on the tender via the same brake valve. However, very often this was independently screwed down with the handbrake. Let's go get a picture of the handbrake to show you. So you can see just here and the other side, dual handbrakes. Now, if the engine was about to descend a great big hill, obviously you needed a lot of brake force all the time, and initially the driver would apply the brakes on the loco, and this would allow the fireman to screw down the handbrake really firmly because of the steam brake assistance. The driver would then take the brakes off the loco, and the tender brake would cause the wagons to buff up. That just simply means what I said, but we can't do it in model form because of the couplings. All the buffers would press together, and this prevented any snatching, which would lead to breaking couplings, which obviously was a very serious affair. So we've reached the point in the train where we go from fitted in bauxite to grey unfitted. So if we move one of these wagons, we should be able to nicely demonstrate that. Underneath, no brake cylinder, the vacuum brakes. And we look underneath these, brake cylinder. So they've been modelled nice and accurately. The yard foreman has been very nice to the driver and fireman of this particular train, with just 6 unfitted at the rear and 10 fitted as the head at the front. Maybe there are some very steep banks indeed, making it a lot safer. But our locos and crew didn't always have it as easy as this. And I think if we give it a few minutes after the passage of this train, there'll be another one along which is completely different. So this time we have another beautiful Hornby AF. This one I purchased back in 2003, I think it was, for £55, brand new, from a model shop in Bournemouth. Amazing value. But you will notice this time that the crew of 48154 have just 2 fitted wagons at the head of the train and 17 unfitted. The 16-ton mineral wagon, when loaded, could weigh around 23 to 25 tons. So that's an awful lot of weight pushing on the loco if it does want to stop, with just the guard's brake van to assist. Whilst welcome, the 2 fitted wagons at the front will do very little really to slow the train if it was needed to. And this is where you'll hear the word or phrase pinning down the brakes, and I'm going to try and show you exactly what that meant. Let's ask the crew of our heavy freight train to work hard and bring this train to a stand, luckily on the level. So these older Bachmann and replica mineral wagons do model the handbrake on a wagon. You can see it's the long bar there with a handle up the side and a ratcheted slot here. Pinning down the brake meant literally that. You would press down on the handle downwards to apply the brake, sometimes using what was called a brake stick, which was a thick piece of wood to give you extra leverage. And then when you had it down as far as you could get it, you would slide a pin in on top which would trap the brake handle in place. I think it would be easier to demonstrate it on a more modern wagon. So with the help of my standard class 3, we'll bring in two more modern models and then take a close-up look at the brake gear. So as you can see, this is a far better model for the brake. So you can see the brake lever going down here, which would operate the shoes via levers underneath. This of course is a fitted vehicle, but they still had to have manual handbrakes. But on the grey 16-ton mineral wagons and all grey wagons, they had only the handbrake, which was okay for securing the wagon in a siding, but they were needed for when running the trains as well. For example, if you were about to descend a steep incline, you would have to stop just before the line fell away, screw down the tender brake that we talked about earlier, and the loco firmly, and then the fireman, maybe sometimes the driver, would go back and pin down, so you would push the lever down as far as you could get it, and then there was a pin that hung on a chain nearby. You would then push the pin in, which would trap the lever down, keeping the brakes applied. You would do this on, well, as many vehicles as you felt necessary to go down the hill with, because the last thing you wanted was for the train to run away. Running away meant that you had exceeded the weight and the brakes were just not capable of stopping it. This did happen, and the only option for the fireman and driver and the guard was to choose a bit of grass that looked safe and leap clear and wait for the inevitable train wreck that would occur. This was obviously frowned upon by the railway companies and neighbours as well. So it was absolutely essential that the correct number of vehicles were pinned down before you started descending any hills, and then you would use the loco brake to control the speed of the train, with the guard assisting at the rear. Once you reached the bottom of the incline, you would then have to re-secure the train and go back and unpin all the wagons ready for going flat or uphill. That was obviously no good at all if the brakes were still on when you're trying to thrash away uphill. So there was a massive amount of skill involved in running these loose coupled trains, and the continuous brake or fitted head that we looked at earlier was a very much welcomed thing, because it meant control without having to keep stopping. I'd like to relate this true story to you. A young driver relates his experience learning the job in steam days. We had 42 16 tons of stone on. Luckily a class 8, best brakes on any engine. Wagons were 23 tons loaded. Guards knew they had to hang on, but never knew how good their brake was until they tried it. Over gradients we had to apply the handbrake on the tender to buff up the wagons, and work the loco brake to control the speed. The steam brake worked on the tender as well as the loco. I was always worried that the loco wheels would pick up. With nearly 1,000 tons pushing us and all on the loco brake, the tyres on the wheels and the brake blocks would glow red hot. Always we had to make sure to buff up or risk snapping the couplings. We used so much brake that after Monday and Tuesday the tender had to be reblocked. On Thursday the loco had to be reblocked, and this was every week. A little history about the 8Fs while we watch. In 1932, when Stanier became Chief Mechanical Engineer on the LMS, most of the freight traffic was being hauled by ageing and failing locomotives. Stanier looked to the Great Western for inspiration, and the Churchwood 2800 class proved to be it. First emerging from Crewe works in 1935, the 7Fs, as they were then classified, so distinguished themselves that they were soon re-rated as 8F. By 1939, 126 locomotives had been built, and the War Department was so impressed with them that they were selected as their standard design for overseas service. 228 were either ordered or taken over for this purpose. On the home front too, the Ministry of Transport had also selected the 8Fs as the standard wartime freight locomotive, resulting in a further 450 locomotives being built. Some were even built at Ashford, Eastleigh and Brighton works, among other non-LMS railway works. By the end of the war, 852 8Fs had been built, with 666 making it onto BR books.